Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together. Detailed lecture notes in English and Hindi, plus practice questions for prelims and mains, only on our Telegram channel. Link in description. Like and subscribe for more.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're cutting through some of that administrative fog, trying to give you really specific, actionable knowledge.
Exactly.
Our mission, it's to unpack this, well, pretty dense legal and institutional framework, the one that holds up India's environmental policies. And this is really crucial stuff, foundational knowledge. If you need to understand how conservation actually gets done or, why certain big projects hit roadblocks. It's a vital area, ecologically speaking, but under huge pressure.
That's absolutely right. We're shifting focus a bit, not just talking about the problems, pollution, biodiversity loss, all that, but looking at the structure, the governance structure itself.
Okay.
So we need to map out where it all starts constitutionally. Then look at the courts set up just for green issues, the bedrock laws like the Wildlife Protection Act, and those core regulatory tools, like the environmental impact assessment. And what you see emerge is this complex system. It's multi-layered, really, and it's designed, or it's supposed to be designed, to kind of balance that massive economic growth push with sustainability.
And we have to start right at the top, don't we, with the rights and the duties laid out.
We do.
We'll get into those fundamental constitutional bits that empower environmental protection. And then, spend some serious time dissecting that regulatory tool that causes so much friction, the EIA.
Environmental impact assessment.
And its pitfalls, which seem pretty controversial, it feels like, where the sort of legislative ideals clash head-on with corporate reality. Okay, let's get into this regulatory maze. #I, the legal and judicial pillars of environmental protection.
So to really grasp the legal reality, you absolutely have to start with the Constitution. Environmental protection in India isn't just, a policy goal. It's baked right into the legislative fabric as a fundamental mandate.
Okay.
There are two key articles, really, that lay that initial groundwork. They define this kind of dual responsibility, what the state has to do and what the citizen has to do.
So this is the why behind it all. The bedrock intent that lets courts interpret and enforce everything that comes later.
Exactly. That's the foundation.
Give us the specifics then, those two pillars.
Okay, first up, you've got the state's duty. This is found in the directive principles of state policy, specifically Article 48A.
Article 48A, got it.
And this is what's called an affirmative obligation. It directs the state to endeavor, that's the word used, to protect and improve the environment, and also to safeguard the forests and wildlife.
Right. Endeavor. So it's a direction, not necessarily something a citizen can sue over directly.
Precisely. It's not directly enforceable by citizens in court, like a fundamental right, but it sets the policy direction. It gives Parliament the constitutional backing it needs to create those stricter environmental laws later on. It basically tells the government what it should be aiming for.
Okay, so the state has a duty. What about the citizen? Is there a matching responsibility?
Absolutely. And that's kind of the clever part of this dual framework. The citizen side of the coin is the fundamental duty under Article 51AG.
51A, John.
Yeah. And this makes it the duty of every citizen of India to protect and improve the natural environment. That includes forests, lakes, rivers, wildlife. And interestingly, it adds the duty to have compassion for living creatures.
That compassion part is interesting. And this duty, unlike the directive principle, it has more legal teeth. Or is it used more broadly?
Well, it's often cited in court, especially in public interest litigations or PILs. It reinforces this idea that citizens aren't just passive beneficiaries of a clean environment. They're also its trustees, its protectors.
That partnership idea, state and citizen, it's the ideal, right? Which brings us, I guess, to the specific court created to enforce these ideals in a, specialized way. The National Green Tribunal.
Yes, the National Green Tribunal, or NGT. Its creation through the NGT Act in 2010 was a really significant step.
Game changer.
In many ways, yes. Its existence is directly tied to that constitutional idea of the right to a healthy environment, which, as you know, the Supreme Court has interpreted as being a fundamental part, an essential part of the right to life under Article 21.
Right, Article 21. So if you have a right to life, you need a healthy environment for that life. Makes sense.
Exactly. The NGT provides that link.
And the NGT isn't just any court, is it? It's meant to be specialized. What's the significance of that? How does that specialization actually work?
Its specialty is key. It's about speed and focus. It offers a dedicated forum, one that's supposed to be scientifically oriented, specifically for environmental disputes. The aim is speedy justice disposing of cases, ideally, within 6 months.
6 months? That's quick compared to normal courts.
It is, and that's crucial because, let's face it, regular civil courts often don't have the technical background to really get into complex scientific or ecological arguments. But that very specialization is also where some of the criticisms come in.
Okay, let's hear about those critiques. The source mentioned issues with who sits on the tribunal.
Yes, there's this ongoing concern that the NGT needs more members who aren't just judges, but judicial experts who are really specialized in environmental law and policy.
Deep expertise needed.
Absolutely. Because environmental cases often hinge on highly technical scientific evidence. Right? Hydrogeology reports, air quality data, biodiversity impact studies. If the tribunal members can't properly interpret or challenge that complex data, well, the quality of justice might suffer. You could end up with decisions that don't fully protect the environment, even if the science is strong.
I see. And the other point was about access.
Yeah, the sources also mentioned that citizens often find it difficult or need easier ways to actually get redressal for violations, especially for complex stuff like problems stemming from faulty EIA reports, which we'll get to later. Access needs to be streamlined.
Right. Okay, so moving from the specialized court to the big overarching law that gives the government its main enforcement power. The Environment Protection Act, 1986. This one often feels like the legislative hammer. Why was it brought in, and what does it mean for government accountability?
Well, the EPA in 1986 was largely a response to the Bhopal gas tragedy in '84. That disaster really highlighted the desperate need for strong, centralized federal power over pollution control. Before that, things were more fragmented, state by state. This act created that central umbrella legislation.
And the practical effects of centralizing that power are huge, right?
Enormous. Two things really stand out in the source material. First, it gives pretty broad immunity to government officers for actions taken under the act.
Immunity? How broad?
It means if an officer takes an action in good faith while applying the EPA Act, they're generally protected legally from prosecution or civil lawsuits. Second, and this is really powerful, the Act specifically debars civil courts from having jurisdiction over actions or directions issued under its authority.
Whoa, debar civil courts, that's significant. So if a citizen or a community feels harmed by a government action taken under this powerful act, they can't just go to their local civil court.
Essentially, no. They're channeled elsewhere. They typically have to go either to the National Green Tribunal, if the issue falls under the specific laws the NGT covers in its schedule, or they have to go directly to the high courts, or even the Supreme Court, usually through writ petitions arguing, for instance, a violation of fundamental rights like Article 21.
So it centralizes power but also funnels challenges into specific, often higher-level legal pathways.
Exactly. It gives the executive branch immense regulatory power, but it does raise questions about accountability because it limits that traditional, broad judicial oversight from civil courts. It pushes the toughest environmental fights into those specialist forums we just talked about. #TAG2, institutions governing wildlife and biodiversity.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. India's wildlife is just vast. It clearly needed its own dedicated legal protection. So let's talk about the foundation for that. The Wildlife Protection Act of 1972.
Right, the WPA 1972. This act came about because, frankly, things were looking grim for India's wild animals and birds back in the mid-20th century. There was a rapid decline.
People noticed.
They did. And it was felt that even the protection offered inside existing sanctuaries and national parks just wasn't enough. So the goal was to create a strong, national, uniform framework for protection and management.
And the real teeth of the WPA comes from how it classifies species, right? Using schedules. How does that determine who gets the most protection?
Precisely. The Act uses these schedules, numbered lists, to categorize species based on how endangered they are, their conservation status. And the animals listed in Schedule 1 and Part 2 of Schedule 2 get absolute protection.
Absolute protection. What does that mean in practice?
It means the law mandates the highest possible penalties for any offenses involving these species. Hunting, trading, harming them. The consequences are severe. The legislative message is crystal clear. These species must be protected no matter what.
Can you give us some examples? Who's on that top-tier list, according to the source?
Sure. The list reflects species that were, and often still are, critically endangered or endemic. It includes iconic animals like the lion-tailed macaque, the rhinoceros, the magnificent great Indian bustard, the Narcondam hornbill, which is found only on one island, the Nicobar megapode, another island species, and of course, the black buck.
A black buck, okay.
So just imagine the legal weight. If someone harms a Nicobar megapode or a black buck, legally, they're facing penalties on par with someone poaching a rhino. The law ties the severity directly to the vulnerability of the species.
Okay, so operating under this WPA framework, we have several specialized bodies. Let's talk about two key ones mentioned: the National Tiger Conservation Authority and the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau. They sound like they do similar things, but maybe not. Let's start with NTCA.
Right, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, or NTCA. This body got its statutory status, meaning it was formally established by law through an amendment to the Wildlife Protection Act in 2006.
Okay, 2006. And its job? Tigers, obviously, but what specifically?
Its core mandate is really about the strategic management and oversight of Project Tiger. It's focused on policy, planning, making sure proper scientific standards are followed in the tiger reserves. For instance, it helps implement conservation measures. And crucially, it's the body that recommends to the state government that a certain area should be officially notified as a tiger reserve.
So it's like the architect, designing a strategy for protecting tiger habitats.
That's a great way to put it. NTCA is the strategic architect.
Then what about the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, the WCCB? If NTCA is the architect, is WCCB the top police?
That's the perfect analogy, actually. The WCCB was set up specifically to strengthen law enforcement. Its focus is controlling poaching and, very importantly, the highly organized illegal trade in wildlife and wildlife products.
So less about habitat management, more about catching the criminals.
Exactly. They function as an intelligence-gathering unit and an operational enforcement body. The source material even notes their role extends beyond tigers, playing a vital part in protecting marine life and coral reefs within coastal protected areas, for instance. They combat the criminal networks that undermine all the conservation efforts. They ensure the WPA's intent leads to arrests and prosecutions.
Got it. Architect versus enforcement. Clear distinction. Now, moving beyond just charismatic animals like tigers, India's biodiversity is massive. Genetic resources, traditional knowledge, that needs protection too, right? Against exploitation, things like biopiracy. That brings us to the Biological Diversity Act, 2002.
Yes, a very important piece of legislation. The Biological Diversity Act, 2002. It has three really clear interconnected objectives.
Okay, what are they?
First, simply the conservation of biological diversity. Second, ensuring the sustainable use of its components, meaning we can use biological resources but not deplete them. And third, this is critical, achieving fair and equitable sharing of the benefits that arise from using genetic resources.
Benefit sharing. That's the anti-biopiracy part.
That's the core of it. Preventing others from taking genetic resources or traditional knowledge, patenting them, and giving nothing back to the country or communities of origin.
And to make this happen, the Act sets up a governance structure. It looks quite decentralized on paper, a three-tier system.
It is. It creates this vertical chain of authority.
Yep.
At the top, the national level, you have the National Biodiversity Authority, the NBA.
NBA, yep.
Then below that, each state is meant to have a State Biodiversity Board, or SBB.
SBB at the state level.
And then, crucially, right down at the grassroots, closest to the actual resources and the local communities who hold traditional knowledge, you have biodiversity management committees, or BMCs.
Local level BMCs.
Interesting.
And the NBA, the national body, seems to hold a lot of power, especially regarding using these resources for things like patents.
It's the ultimate gatekeeper, yes. Anyone, whether it's a foreign company, a research institution, even an Indian entity who wants to get intellectual property rights like a patent, based on biological resources or associated traditional knowledge they got from India, they must get prior approval from the NBA.
Must get approval.
And that approval isn't just a rubber stamp. It always comes with conditions attached, specifically related to benefit sharing.
How does that work with the local BMCs?
Well, the BMCs often play a role in documenting local biodiversity and knowledge. The NBA ensures that if any commercial or research benefits are generated from that knowledge or resource, a fair share, whether monetary or otherwise, flows back to those local communities or conservation efforts. It's about fulfilling that core objective of equity. #3, the role of scientific assessment and land rights.
Right. So if the courts and laws are the teeth, then good data, scientific assessment, that's kind of the eyes guiding where those teeth should bite, right?
Absolutely. You need robust data.
Let's look at the institutions designed to provide that data, especially on forests and land, starting with the Forest Survey of India, the FSI.
The FSI is really the main authority for assessing India's forest resources. Its most important output, the one everyone watches for, is the India State of Forest Report, or ISFR.
ISFR. And that comes out how often?
It's biennial. So published every 2 years. And this report provides those crucial numbers: forest cover, changes, types of forest that feed into policy decisions, conservation planning, and even India's international reporting on climate change and forests.
Okay, and what's the latest picture from their reports according to our source material? Are we gaining or losing forest cover overall?
The data actually offers some encouragement, though obviously constant effort is needed. The sources state that India ranks 10th globally in terms of total forest cover.
10th in the world. That's significant.
It is. And that cover accounts for about 24.39% of the country's total land area. Maybe even more striking, based on a recent FAO report mentioned, India is ranked 8th among the top 10 nations, showing the greatest annual net gain in forest area.
Net gain. So despite deforestation pressures, we're actually adding more forest area than we're losing year on year.
According to that data, yes. It suggests that afforestation efforts, conservation programs supported by institutions like FSI providing the monitoring, are having a measurable positive effect in increasing the total green cover.
That's actually quite hopeful. But forests aren't just stats, are they? They're ecosystems, and crucially, they're home to millions of people, often tribal communities.
Exactly. Which brings us to another really critical piece of legislation, one that intersects social justice and environment. The Forest Rights Act 2006, or FRA.
That FRA, this one feels different. It seems to shift power quite dramatically.
It does. The FRA was designed primarily to address the historical injustices faced by forest-dwelling tribal communities and other traditional forest dwellers. Their rights over the forest they lived in for generations often weren't legally recognized.
So this act tries to fix that. How?
By recognizing their rights, yes, and crucially, by shifting the authority for determining those rights. Under the FRA, the key body is the Gram Sabha, the village assembly.
The Gram Sabha, not the forest department.
No. The Act explicitly gives the Gram Sabha the authority to initiate the process for figuring out the nature and extent of forest rights, whether they are individual rights or community rights, or both.
Wow. That is a fundamental shift, giving the local village assembly the power to start the rights recognition process. What does that mean for the traditional power dynamics, say, between forest communities and the state forest department?
It means, in theory, the local community itself, through its Gram Sabha, becomes the primary decision-maker about forest resources and conservation within their traditional boundaries. It recognizes different types of rights, individual forest rights, IFR, which can include title to land they've been cultivating or living on, and community forest rights.
CFR.
CFR sounds important. What does that cover?
It covers rights over common forest resources, things like collecting and selling minor forest produce, grazing rights, water bodies, and significantly, the right to protect, regenerate, conserve, or manage any community forest resource they've traditionally used.
So it empowers communities not just to use, but also to conserve.
Exactly. But the implementation, well, that's often where the friction lies. Getting these rights formally recognized requires that the Gram Sabha process works effectively and that the state machinery, including the forest department, fully supports this decentralization of power. That remains a major challenge. Understood. And all this ties back to the national goal of increasing forest cover, which is supported by other bodies too, right? Like the National Afforestation and Eco-Development Board.
Yes, the National Afforestation and Eco-Development Board, or NAEB. Its role is specifically to promote afforestation, ecological restoration, and eco-development activities. It focuses heavily on rehabilitating degraded forest lands and lands adjoining forests, often working through the National Afforestation Program.
So while FSI measures the results, NAEB is one of the bodies driving the actual planting and restoration work.
Precisely. They're part of the engine trying to push that 24.39% figure even higher and restore degraded ecosystems.
Okay, now we get to it. The regulatory flashpoint. The Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA. This seems like the single most critical gatekeeper for major development projects, but also potentially the most vulnerable point in the system.
It's absolutely fundamental, yes. The EIA process is, in principle, the main tool India has to ensure that environmental protection and sustainable development aren't just afterthoughts. They're supposed to be built into industrial and development policy right from the start.
Well, how does it do that?
By forcing project proponents, the companies or agencies wanting to build something, to conduct studies, analyze, and then publicly disclose the potential environmental impacts and costs before they start construction. It's a preemptive check.
And this process was significantly changed by the EIA notification of 2006, wasn't it? How did that change things, particularly regarding who approves projects?
The 2006 notification brought in a major change: decentralization. It did this by classifying projects into two main categories, which determines who does the appraisal.
Okay. Category A and Category B.
Exactly. Category A projects are generally the big ones, the ones with potentially significant, maybe irreversible environmental impacts. These are appraised only at the national level by the Central Impact Assessment Agency, IAA, and an Expert Appraisal Committee, EAC. And for Category A, a full EIA is mandatory right from the start.
So national level scrutiny for the biggest projects. What about Category B?
Category B projects are typically smaller in scale or have less intense impacts. These are appraised at the state level by the State Level Environment Impact Assessment Authority, SEIAA, and a State Level Expert Appraisal Committee, SEAC.
State level bodies for Category B.
Right. Now, the overall EIA cycle for all projects that need clearance involves 4 main stages mentioned in the source. First is screening. This is only for Category B projects to decide if they need a full EIA or not based on their potential impact. Then comes scoping, which defines what impacts need to be studied and the terms of reference for the EIA report. Then, the crucial public hearing, and finally, appraisal by the relevant committee, EAC or ACA.
That decentralization to the state level for Category B was the idea to speed things up.
That was largely the intention, yes, to reduce the burden on the central government and potentially make clearances faster. But of course, it also put a lot more pressure and responsibility on those state-level authorities, the SCIs and CIACs.
Let's focus on that public hearing stage. It sounds like the main democratic check in the whole process. What does the law actually require for public involvement?
The law is quite specific here. It mandates public consultation. The State Pollution Control Board, SPCB, has the job of conducting the hearing. They have to publish a notice about the hearing date, time, place in at least 2 newspapers.
2 newspapers?
Yes. And crucially, one of those must be in the vernacular language of the area where the project is proposed, so local people can actually read it.
Makes sense.
And from the date that notice is published, the public has 30 days to submit their input. That could be suggestions, views, comments, objections, anything relevant to the environmental impacts. The idea is to ensure that the people who might be directly affected by, say, pollution or loss of resources have a formal legal opportunity to voice their concerns.
Okay, 30 days. Notice in the local papers. It sounds robust on paper. But as the source material strongly suggests, the reality seems, well, less than ideal.
It's putting it mildly sometimes.
Given how critical the EIA is supposed to be, what are the major systemic flaws or challenges that really undermine its effectiveness? This is where it gets concerning, right?
Yes. The sources point to several major recurring problems that seriously weaken the EIA process. Let's break them down. First, there are significant applicability loopholes.
Loopholes?
Well, many projects that definitely will have environmental impacts can actually avoid the whole EIA process. They might not be listed in Schedule 1 of the notification, which lists the types of projects requiring clearance. Or they might structure the project so its initial investment cost falls below a certain threshold set in the rules.
Ah, so if you keep the official cost just under the limit, you might bypass the need for an EIA.
Exactly. A project proponent, knowing how much scrutiny an EIA involves, might deliberately downsize the stated initial investment, or break a large project into smaller phases, specifically to slip into a lower category, like B2, which might not need an EIA, or avoid the clearance process altogether. It's a way to bypass public and scientific review.
Strategic project designed to avoid accountability. Okay, what's the second major issue?
The second huge problem is the quality or lack thereof the EIA reports themselves and outright fraud.
Fraud. That sounds serious.
It is. Firstly, these EIA reports are often massive documents, hundreds, sometimes thousands of pages. They're incredibly technical, filled with jargon. This makes it almost impossible for ordinary citizens or local communities to actually read and understand them, let alone critique them effectively during the short public hearing window. It defeats the purpose of consultation.
So they're inaccessible?
Largely, yes. But worse than that is the documented issue of fraudulent studies. The consultants who prepare these EIA reports are often hired and paid directly by the project proponent, the company that wants the clearance.
Conflict of interest right there.
A huge one.
Yeah.
And there are known cases, systemic issues really, where consultants use flawed data, outdated information, or sometimes just copy-paste baseline environmental data from completely different regions into the report for the current project.
Copy-pasting data? Seriously?
Yes. Because there's often no robust, centralized, publicly accessible database of baseline environmental conditions for different regions. This lack of a central data bank makes it very hard for the appraisal committees or the public to cross-check the claims made in the EIA report. Is the water quality data real? Is the list of local species accurate? It's hard to verify.
That's Shocking. It's not just bad science. It sounds like actively gaming the system to get approval, regardless of the real environmental costs.
It certainly opens the door wide for that.
Yeah.
Which leads to the third major criticism highlighted in the sources. This deeply controversial idea, often referred to as the pay and pollute principle.
Pay and pollute. That sounds like the opposite of what environmental law should do. How does that manifest?
It manifests through mechanisms like allowing projects that started illegally without prior clearance to apply for clearance after the violation has already occurred, post facto clearance, or through concepts like the Environmental Supplement Plan, ESP, mentioned in the source.
Environmental Supplement Plan. What's that?
Well, the criticism is that an ESP essentially allows a company that violated EIA conditions or started without clearance to pay a penalty or fund some supposedly remedial environmental project and then potentially get their violation regularized or forgiven, allowing them to continue.
Wait, so instead of stopping the project or imposing strict penalties for breaking the law beforehand, they can sometimes pay a fee after the fact and carry on?
That's the core criticism, yes. It seems to contradict the fundamental principle of EIA, which is preventative. It also seems to clash with the internationally accepted polluter pays principle, which is about the polluter bearing the costs of remediation and penalties for damage caused. Here, critics argue, it looks more like paying for permission to have violated the law in the first place.
That feels like it completely undermines the whole point of having an EIA process if you can just violate it and then potentially pay your way out.
Exactly. The source explicitly says this approach is criticized for potentially defeating the ultimate purpose of EIA and promoting corporate development based on this contradictory pay and pollute idea. It essentially risks legalizing violations.
And is there evidence this is a widespread problem?
Well, the source notes that a significant percentage, around 41% of cases filed in the National Green Tribunal, involve the NGT finding flaws or problems with the prior EIA assessments or clearances. That statistic alone suggests major prevalent failures in ensuring proper environmental scrutiny before projects get the green light. This gap between the law's intent and what actually happens on the ground is, well, it's the central challenge in environmental governance today. Hashtag synthesis and comparison.
Okay, that breakdown of the EIA really shows the tension, doesn't it, between the rules and the reality. Let's use this Q&A bit to clarify roles again, this time within that wildlife framework under the WPA. We talked about the National Tiger Conservation Authority, NTCA, and the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, WCCB. They both operate under the same act, but what's the really key functional difference between them?
Yeah, that's a really good distinction to make clear because on the surface, they might seem related, but their jobs are very different. Think of it this way. The NTCA is primarily about statutory management and planning.
Management and planning.
Right. Its focus is strategic, high-level policy for Project Tiger, setting standards for how tiger reserves should be managed, advising state governments on conservation strategy, recommending areas become reserves. It's the strategic, habitat-focused policy layer.
Got it. Strategy and policy for tigers and reserves. So how does the WCCB fit in, then? Its role seems broader.
Exactly. The WCCB is laser-focused on enforcement and intelligence. Its specific job is to combat organized wildlife crime. That means poaching syndicates, illegal trafficking networks, the cross-border trade in animal parts, CITES violations.
So the crime-fighting arm?
Precisely. It functions like an operational, intelligence-led, almost police-like unit for wildlife crime across India, not just within tiger reserves. They gather intel, coordinate raids, work with police and customs. So, NTCA plans the conservation strategy for tigers. WCCB goes after the criminals who are illegally killing wildlife and trading their parts. One manages the habitat and policy. The other enforces the law against the criminals. Hashtag outro. We've definitely covered a lot of ground today, digging into the institutions and measures. So before we wrap up, let's do some quick recall points, or prelims pointers, just to lock in some key facts.
Okay, ready for the quick hits?
All right. Remember, the National Green Tribunal, NGT. Its establishment is constitutionally linked to interpreting the right to life under Article 21.
NGT Article 21, got it.
The Forest Rights Act, FRA, 2006. The key local authority that initiates the rights determination process is the Gram Sabha.
FRA Gram Sabha.
Right. The Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, WCCB, its core mandate is enforcement against organized wildlife crime and illegal trade.
WCCB Enforcement and Trade.
Okay. And the Biological Diversity Act, remember that distinctive three-tier structure.
Yep.
NBA National, SBB State, and BMC's local.
BD Act, MBA, SBB, BMC's. Perfect. So, stepping back for the mains' insights, What we've really seen today is that India has this incredibly detailed, quite expansive institutional and legal setup for the environment. It clearly shows a strong legislative intent for comprehensive environmental protection.
Absolutely. The laws are there, the bodies are there on paper, but, and this is the big but, that strong intent often gets undermined in practice. We see serious issues with implementation, problems with coordination between different agencies, and that critical weakness around accountability.
Especially highlighted by those EIA critiques we discussed.
Exactly. The loopholes, the potential for fraud, and that whole pay and pollute dynamic really expose the gap.
So for you, the learner, especially thinking about governance topics for mains, the crucial thing to grasp is that constant tension, that friction between the ideal, the laws, the rights, like Article 21 giving you a right to a healthy environment, and the often messy enforcement reality, where regulatory flaws can sometimes be exploited, potentially compromising the very environment those laws were meant to protect.
It really boils down to that gap, doesn't it? The system is complex, maybe even well-designed in parts, but the challenge is bridging the distance between the law on the books and the actual outcome on the ground.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. We've established that enforcement is often the weak link, particularly in monitoring whether companies follow the rules and ensuring EIA reports are scientifically sound. We heard about fraudulent studies being a real problem.
A major problem.
Now, the source mentioned that technology, like remote sensing and IT tools, is already being tested for specific issues, like regulating sand mining. So here's the question. How could that kind of technology, maybe things like mandatory, centralized, geo-referenced baseline environmental data banks, real-time satellite monitoring for major projects be applied universally? Could technology be used to mandate transparency, make it much harder to submit fraudulent data, and enforce real-time accountability across all major development projects, closing some of those loopholes we discussed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The tech is increasingly there. Using it universally to enforce accountability that requires the political will to match the technological capability.
Imagine what genuine, technologically enforced transparency could do for environmental governance. Something to think about.
Definitely.
That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon to explore another essential topic.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Telegram and Instagram. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.